Welcome to Alexandrians with Daniel Karim, where I interview authors, both living and dead ones, through the power of AI. Today's guest is Jay Townsend, an author, speechwriter, campaign strategist, and arguably the world-leading expert for political psychology. He has worked on 4 presidential campaigns and dozens of Senate and congressional races, shaping millions of lives and entire nations in the process. Jay is also the author of So You Want to Run for Public Office, The Worst Mistakes Candidates Make, and Timeless Lessons from the 2016 elections. A recipient of multiple national awards for political advertising, he has lectured on political warfare at the United States Military Academy and advised leaders at the highest level of public life. In our conversation, we explore his biographical journey from start to finish, the lessons he learned from working closely with world leaders, how to speak like a politician, the art of raising funds for a campaign, and what it takes to develop an unbendable moral character that is not susceptible to the exposure of power. Enjoy this conversation, and if it speaks to your heart, please share it with other Alexandrian spirits. Jay, it's an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for making room to make an appearance in our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and having me on the show.
I've been a recent visitor in your YouTube library over the last couple of days, which is, I feel, one of the great treasure troves of the internet that I had lots of fun in learning with, in a way. And one of the questions that I would like to start with is, in regards to starting, where do you feel your journey started and who inspired you to dedicate your life to the investigation of politics?
Good question. I think in hindsight, it was exposure to politics that began with my father. My father served in the state legislature in the state of Indiana. And I remember his first campaign where I was old enough to understand what was happening. I was 6 years old. And my mother would pick me up after school and make me put on a tie and a little jacket. And she would drive to a part of his district, and I would go to door handing out his literature. And that was my first exposure to politics. His campaign in 1960, and he ran again in 1962 and 1964 and 1966, and it just became a ritual. When it was campaign season, I went door to door for him after school. Well, I was also the firstborn. There's always a unique relationship between his father and firstborn son. I was very inquisitive about politics in general. He was very patient, and he answered a lot of my questions. Now, my father was very, very well read. He had an extraordinarily high IQ. And he had this habit when we'd sit down at dinner, he would ask me questions about current events. Well, he subscribed to 3 weekly magazines and 3 different newspapers that came to the farm every day. And his expectation was, since he was buying those newspapers and those magazines, that I would read them. Now, at dinner, if I didn't know the answer to the question, he would excuse me from the table and invite me to go figure out the answer to that question, and then I could eat dinner. Well, guess what? I didn't like having my dinner interrupted, so it became a habit that I would be very well informed about current events when we sat down to dinner. Because of that, I remember distinctly it was 1968, and I came home from school, got ready to do my chores, I noticed the newspapers on the kitchen table and glanced at them before I went out to the barn. And I saw a story there that says Robert Kennedy was going to be campaigning in Indiana that day. He was running for president at the time. So I decided to finish my chores early so I could see him on the evening news. And it was a momentous day in the United States. It was April 4th, 1968. And when I saw the newscast, I expected to find Kennedy at the top of the news hour. But instead, the first thing I saw were cities all over America and burning and looting and going on almost everywhere. And then President Johnson came on television pleading for calm and demanding law and order. I'm 13 years old. I mean, I'm shocked at what's going on in my own country. And about halfway through the newscast, they finally went to Robert Kennedy. And he's standing on the back of this flatbed truck in what was then called the ghetto of Indianapolis, the capital city of Indiana, surrounded by a sea of really, really angry people. And he stood on the back of that truck and he gave a speech about the life of Martin Luther King, the civil rights leader at the time. Martin Luther King had been assassinated that afternoon. And there was Kennedy asking the people of Indianapolis not to respond to violence with violence, but to instead honor Dr. King the way he would want to be honored, remembering his words, remembering his message of love and civility. And Kennedy, toward the end of his speech, said, please don't go loot, don't go burn, don't go destroy businesses. Instead, please join hands and go to your homes and churches to pray. And honor Dr. King the way he would want you to honor him. Remember Dr. King the way he would want you to remember him. And tomorrow we begin anew, and let us have peace in the United States. It was a seminal moment in hindsight. There had been the political side I'd seen working for my father in his political campaigns. I didn't realize it at the time, but it dawned on me over time as I thought about that seminal moment in my life, seeing that what Robert Kennedy had done was change the course of an entire city. There was no violence in Indianapolis that night. And it demonstrated to me the power of words, words that changed the history of an entire city. And that's when it dawned on me. I was about 17 by the time I figured out what I had seen. It was the power of words. Words are the most powerful drug humankind has ever known. That's the year it also dawned on me that if you are in a role in your life where you can help political figures craft their words, you too can shape the destiny of humankind and play a role in it. That's when I fell in love with politics. I am one of the luckiest people you or members of your audience will ever meet. And the reason is I discovered at age 17 what I wanted to do and what my passions were. And I think it was Mark Twain who said that the two luckiest days in your life, number one is the day you were born. And the second is the day you figured out why you were born. as far as I'm concerned, I've never worked a day in my life, and I work 7 days a week because I love what I do.
What do you
That is a
feel?
long answer to your question about my start.
It's Thank you so much for sharing this. It's what were some of the most important words your father ever shared with you personally? Because also one of the things that you and I share in common, Jay, is that my father was not a politician, but a persecuted author who the strange life, and I learned through him the power of words by having a penship with him when he was in prison, in where he gave me books to read, so to say, and that's how I discovered my own power and the power of the words, so to say. But it was specifically not what he said, but who said it to me. What do you feel were some of the sharings your father entrusted you with that held a special kind of meaning or a particular role in your own development for you?
He influenced me more than any other man that's ever lived. Uh, I mentioned he was very bright, but he was profoundly wise as well. So, the most profound thing that I remember, I was the firstborn son on a farm. The expectation was that I would grow up to be a farmer. But by the time I'd finished college, I was so drawn to politics that I had to go tell my father one day that, Dad, I don't think I'm cut out to run the farm. I don't think it's my destiny. And I'm sorry that I have to disappoint you. And he said, This doesn't disappoint me. I am happy for you. The greatest gift you could ever give me is to live a happy life. And if you've discovered your passion, you will always be a happy man. That was profound. Now, lots of other tidbits of wisdom. He hated bigots. He hated racism. Nothing made him angrier, and he hated frauds. And I only had to learn the lesson once, but don't lie. Just tell the truth, and you'll be fine. If you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you've said.
Did the as what do you feel was I'm very interested also about the awakening of political consciousness for an individual.
Mhm.
And it seems to be that some people have a nexus event happening in their life where, with what you described, for instance, with the assassination of a global American figure that changes, that initiates a boy into a man, so to say. What do you feel uh, did you learn, or how did this event of um, going through this as an American did for you personally, so to say?
It was the story about Robert Kennedy. Um, my father was my hero, but Robert Kennedy was my other hero. I had two in life. I followed his career. I inhaled what it was that he stood for. His message, his life, his causes, in addition to the tutelage of my father, kind of made me who I am, informed my own value system. But I'm going to mention here that I have probably worked in 450 different campaigns in my lifetime. And I can make a few observations about people who step up to the plate to run for office. Um, their desire to seek power to help people is generally because of something that happened on their journey through life. It was something that they saw or heard or experienced that made them want to do something to better humankind or fix a problem or right a wrong or correct an injustice. Normal people do not run for office. Politicians and people who run for office are therefore not normal people because normal people don't do that. The experience that's happened on their journey is generally the seed that was planted at some point in their life that maybe later germinated or may have germinated at the moment that gave them this intense desire to hold power and use it for good. Because running for office, it is almost an out-of-body experience. The brickbats that you take to be in public life, the sheer inconvenience of spending day after day after day talking to people and going to events and giving speeches and raising money to succeed in politics. It's a heavy burden to carry, to go through a political campaign and have to re-audition to voters every few years and win their votes again. That's not normal because most people never would do that. So what makes them unique is some experience in their life. So I had mine, but usually when I meet a candidate who's called me and said, asked for help, the very first thing I do is have a 2-hour conversation with them. And I have them take me through their entire life's journey. And more times than often than not, I'll hear their story. They may not know it's their story, but I'll find that moment in their life when that seed was planted that made them want to run for office.
Seeds is an interesting word. It's in the Bible. One of my favorite art pieces of the Bible is from the tree of life, and it has two kind of fruits on it. And it's like this very old painting. On the right side is the has Christ, and it's in the form of the hero myth as a representation of following virtue, and the other side is sin, like little skulls, so to say, that represent that this other path of life leads to the withering of all being. It's very interesting in regards to looking at the seeds that harbor within politicians, because I think somehow it is the arena where we can find the best and the worst of us very equally together. Have you made some experiences in regards to people who, or what has the observation of these politicians over the totality of your life has taught you about human nature in those regards?
Most candidates begin their careers with a sincere desire to change or fix a problem or do something useful. They don't always remain that way. After a few years in public life, particularly if they've kind of accomplished what they wanted to, the mission ceases to become changing the order for good to keeping power. And they'll go to great lengths to keep it, even if they don't know what it is anymore that they want to do with it. It's power for power's sake. That's why sometimes they start really well at the beginning of the career, and they end up overstaying their welcome when they don't have a good reason to remain. So our founders in the United States used to believe that you would serve for a period of time and then go back to your business or your prior occupation. Uh, there are a lot of politicians around the world who turned it into a lifelong occupation.
Can I bounce back? I'm not an American yet, even though I'm probably going to move to the state. That's so interesting to me. So the original vision was that the taking on the ministry of public service was something transitory or the temporary, and then you go back to having interesting. So this
That
whole
was
idea
the
of
original
people
vision.
moving into the White House or like moving into the state, and that's now their life, is something that is a deviant from the original vision. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, the founding fathers here that wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence thought that power should be temporary, that you run, you serve for a short period of time, and then you go back to your prior life. The notion of a professional politician would have been foreign to the founding fathers. But this is the way our democracy has evolved. Our Congress, our Senate, there are no term limits. If you want to serve in the Senate and you can be reelected every 6 years, you could be elected at age 30 and stay there until you die. Now, I don't say this about all who spend their life in politics. Some keep fresh ideas, they serve well, they understand government, they become very wise, they use the power well. But there are others who try and stick around and they cut corners and they compromise with their moral code in the name of keeping the job. We've never figured out how to discern one from the other. We've had people suggest term limits, but of course, this Congress has never gone along with imposing term limits on itself. This Congress, our Congress, and our voters did limit presidents to 2 terms. Nobody can be president for life in the United States. You serve 2 terms and that's it. You can't run again. But we don't impose those term limits on the legislative branch.
Fascinating. If you, how do I put this? You're helping people to this may be an oversimplification, but also to rise to power. And ideally, you pick the people that they are the right kind of seats where they are working in the interest of particularly noble vision. How do you come to power as an individual? If you would describe the path of somebody who wants to run for office, how do you go about these things? How do you become a charismatic leader who becomes a state authority, so to say? This was probably a very bad question, but try to understand me.
All right. But number one, that seed I mentioned, you really have to want to succeed in public life to get into public life. And the price you pay is going through a political campaign and winning more votes than your competitors. This is a pretty difficult task for a lot of people because it's very different than what they were raised to do. It requires that they learn to speak well. It requires that they be well read. It requires that they ask other people for money to advance their cause. So, first ingredient number one is you have to be willing to work for it because nobody's going to give it to you, which means you have to want it. The second ingredient here is you have to be absolutely sincere about why you want this power. In other words, if you want power, but you can't tell anybody why you want it or what you're going to do with it, you don't belong in public life. It's the candidates who say, I want this job and this is what I'm going to do with that. So I have a test when people call me. They call me and say, hey, Jay, I want to run for such and such. It's the very first phone call I have with anybody. I said, okay, I'm glad you want to run for office. Tell me about what you would like to accomplish. I know this, if they have an answer to that question, they got the potential to be a pretty good candidate. If they do not have an answer to that question, there's nothing I can do for them. If you want power and you can't tell me why you want it, you're not ever going to be a good candidate. Either that or you're in it for the wrong reasons. So it's the willingness to go through the sacrifice you have to go through to win an election, but what it is that keeps you motivated on difficult days is this intense desire to use that power for good. If you don't have that intense desire, what happens is you find that the price that you have to pay going through a campaign is really not worth it. It's like I read a story about the first American to ever run a 4-minute mile. Nobody had ever done it until he did it. And he'd found a coach and said, I want to run the 4-minute mile. And the coach says, really, are you willing to put in the work to train your body mentally and emotionally and physically to meet that goal? And he said, yes, sir, I am. And the coach says, good. Tomorrow morning, I want you to meet me at the beach and we're going to run in wet sand. And that's going to be our first practice. And he did. Hours in the wet sand. If you ever tried to run in wet sand, it's excruciating. So after they finished the first day, he looked at the runner and said, you still want to run the 4-minute mile? Yes. Good. We're going to do this again tomorrow morning. This went on for 6 months. This intense training of running the 4-minute mile, some cases barefoot in wet sand. And over that 6-month period, the coach finally came to the conclusion he wants it. And then they started the regimen of bodybuilding, muscle training, weight training, and some other preparation. He knew the kid wanted to do it. The kid proved it to him because he was willing to pay the price to get his body and his mind and spirit ready for race day. He succeeded. So I liken running for office to what that runner went through because it will stretch your limits. There's nothing easy about being a candidate. You have to do things you don't want to do. You have to do them at inconvenient times. It interferes with your personal and professional life. It's really inconvenient. Do you want it? Now, so I know if they seem to have the desire and they can tell me why they want the job, that purpose inside of them to fix a problem or correct an injustice or do something that is really useful for society is that desire that will take them through the difficult days. They'll get up and they'll go again. You have to have that kind of personal composition to succeed.
The old Jungian psychologists had the notion that anger or suffer or individual pain could be utilized as a compass in regards to helping an individual to figure out what their unique purpose in the world is. Sometimes certain problems bother us more than others. And one of the things that I have noticed for me personally is that one of the paths, it seems, to discovering this calling is investigating things within yourself that hurt you more than others. For instance, for me, the fact that somebody tried to kill my father in some sense made me feel a stronger emotional connection to a library being burned down, somebody being censored, somebody being silent. And I feel I still turn back to that particular wound, so to say. Have you found in the candidates who really have a calling, who don't do it to get a job, that their vision for the world was born out of an extreme deprivation that they have personally suffered? Do you think it's like there's a connection between they want to contribute something to the world that was taken away from them, or where they want to make sure that nobody else will feel what they have felt in a particular sense? Because it seems to me that in regards to those seeds, this is like a crossroad for the human soul, where some people have these extreme forms of pain and they want to inflict it onto others, or people who want to save others from never having to go through it again. Have you found something similar in regards to when you were working with people like this? These
Yes.
psychological patterns of how to create a real politician or founder, so to say?
All right, you're touching on an important point. Yes. So I mentioned earlier, take a candidate through a story.
Yeah.
We do a pretty deep dive in going through that. And I'll ask them, what's the worst day you ever experienced when you really weren't even sure you wanted to live again? I'm looking for something traumatic that may have happened. Maybe that moment. All right. Sometimes it is. I mean, there was I remember a candidate for Congress several years ago in New York. There was a shooting on a commuter train by somebody who had a gun that he had no business having. The shooter killed her husband and several others on a commuter train in New York. After the funeral and after she buried her husband, she announced her candidacy for Congress and said, I am going to fix this. I am running for Congress to pass legislation that will prohibit people like that from owning assault weapons, because this should not have happened and it should never happen again. That was a searing personal experience that she had that gave her the motivation for running for Congress. She won, and she, in fact, helped pass a bill that banned that kind of gun from being on a commuter train. Case in point. But sometimes it's not the personal experience, it's seeing something that strikes you as totally unjust, or seeing a situation and nobody stepping up to make sure it doesn't happen again, and deciding if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to get in the arena and try and fix it. American politics right now is in a great deal of turmoil. We're kind of trying to decide whether we're going to remain a democracy or become some sort of dictatorship or aristocracy or whatever. That is motivating a lot of people who never thought of running for office before, who are standing up now and saying, okay, this isn't happening on my watch. I can't, in good conscience, stay silent. I'm going to get in the arena and try and fix this. We have more people interested in running for office than in the history of the United States. And it's the environment that's drawing them out of their chairs to say, I got to do something. Now, the fact that they're willing to get out of their chairs is probably due to something that happened in their life that convinced them that they needed to step up.
Jay, I grew up in Germany where I believe we are always running social experiments to some form, whether we are conscious of it or not. And one of the things that I grew up in Germany where there was a strong counter movement to national identity. We are in Germany, like we've had this extreme totalitarian regime with the National Socialists, and one of the consequences of this seems that we have really had enough with charismatic leaders and identifying ourselves with flags, and we're coming from, and we had an extreme multicultural movement, so to say, afterwards. And one of the strange consequences of that from growing up where I grew up was that nobody really felt connected to their state anymore, which was an interesting thing, but because it came with benefits. Like I always thought of myself more as a citizen of the world, but it also came with strange downsides where, well, if you can just move to another country, then the sense of citizenship and responsibility seems to be diluting down in some sense. How do you feel we reconcile with the us having to reconfigure the role of what it means to be a citizen of a country, so to say? Because I think that currently we are figuring some things out, and I think the United States are at the forefront of like elaborating publicly what is a border, who should live here, who can stay here, what is the duties of a person. If you could, as somebody who has deep experience on these things, what is a couple of lines that are from your heart in regards to what it means to be a citizen?
The world goes through cycles, and countries go through cycles. Democracy goes through them. And of course, not all countries have democratic forms of government. So when things are relatively good with the economy and everybody is kind of content with the way things are going and there are no big issues on the table, it's quite often uh, it's common that voter participation drops. Fewer people are voting because there's no momentous thing at stake in the election. When things don't appear to be working well, it motivates certain sectors of the electorate to register their discontent, and voting participation goes up. So part of this is a product of the state of the country in which, the state of a country that has a democratic form of government and voter participation. They're asked at election time either to affirm that we're happy with the incumbents as they are, or we're unhappy, we want to make a change. But there are outside circumstances that affect how a country behaves and who votes. America was in a very different mindset after 9/11, when we had been attacked by people who were not Americans using our own aircraft as bombs. to knock down buildings. It was a shock to the American system, and it changed the politics for a period of time. New legislation was passed, new people got into public life because of that. We went through every country occasionally has a recession when the economy contracts or people lose jobs or inflation or something happens just because of the natural economic cycle. That changes the conversation when people are unhappy. So democracy is very, very fluid in that outside things and policy decisions from within a country can affect the quality of life enjoyed by the people who live in the country. Elections are a way of saying, I don't like the people there. I want to try somebody new, or I want to try somebody with a better idea. That,
One of the things that's curious is there seems to be a million miles away from understanding what's actually going on inside the rooms where the politicians speak and what's being conveyed to the public. It's very strange, and I feel there's a strong sense of distrust. I think all around the world in regards to what our leadership is doing and how things are actually decided. As somebody who's been inside of those rooms in a way, what is something somebody who's never been in the politics believes what's going on that's actually not going on? And if you could give us a little bit look of the insider life of a politician's actual life, so to say.
okay. I've been privileged to be in a few of those meetings. And I remember one in particular, I was working for a United States senator. He was known for his courage. He was known for being ahead of the curve. He was known for his ability to look 5 years out and see a problem coming and introducing bills to prevent the problem. And he surrounded himself with people who were experts in policy, economics, science, defense, healthcare, spending. And we would sit in his office and he'd talk about votes that were coming up or legislation he wanted to introduce. And he would say at the outset, I don't need political advice from you. I need you to tell me what the right thing is to do. I will figure out the politics, but all I want from you is the best you have between your ears. I will take responsibility for the decision I make. I will factor in the politics. All I want to know from you is the truth. Give me your best advice about what we should be doing to fix this problem. That's the way it should be done. Now, there is this adage that's true. When you are in public life and have faced voters and may have to face voters again, this is where political leadership comes in. You can never get too far ahead of your constituents, and you never want to get too far behind them. It's knowing, okay, my ultimate goal is to do this, but I need to educate voters about why this is going to be necessary, and that's going to take some time. Because if I just go out and say tomorrow that we're going to do this, they may object to it because they don't understand enough about why we have to do it. So I have to spend time educating the voters about why a difficult decision looms and why it may take a little bit of sacrifice on everybody's part. That's the job of a politician. That's called leadership.
Very interesting how important the questions are that we ask ourselves and that are being posed inside of those rooms. It's what you just described was very core, very near to the original version of the library I'm currently building, which I hope it helps every leader to surround themselves with a council of elders where they can freely pick from the greatest geniuses of that ever lived. But if the question is wrong, and if it's like, how do we solve the situation on behalf of the community, but rather how do we stay in power? It's so interesting how the same room can be rather than a force for good be the entire opposite in a way. And it's like so strange as a citizen, I would say, to have a feeling what's going on in those kind of rooms. In a way, I find it very interesting. Where it's like you are not really sure who's governing you. I want to piggyback on another thing that you touched on in regards to the job of being a politician and the skills you need to have. If you would write a little paragraph on like this is the job. Because for me, for instance, when I became a founder, um, I didn't really find a book that explains to me this new role that I suddenly had of like you need to have a vision and recruit people. There's like, but how it actually works, there wasn't really a handbook, and I feel like for politics is somewhat the same. And I feel like inside of your mind, Jay, is an entire library of what it means to be a politician and what the sub skills are in order to be a good one and to be an effective politician, so to say. What do you feel are the core skills? What do you feel is the description of what a good politician's job is, and what do you think are the sub skills they need to develop in order to be an effective leader?
The best politicians I've ever known were those who had an unbendable moral code. Because politics will tempt you 6 ways from Sunday. It will. You're always facing pressure from your campaign contributors. You're facing pressure for the media that wants you to do something that may not be politically wise. You are always facing pressure from interest groups, be they organized interest groups or what we call the billionaire class. And ultimately, you have to answer to the voters. You're under constant pressure, and these four entities are not always on the same page. So you're under constant pressure to bend your moral code or to do something that you know isn't quite right. Having an unbendable moral code that you say there are certain things I will not do to stay in office. There are things I will not tolerate, even if it means my political demise. I will go down with that ship before I will sacrifice my moral code. So there's a woman named Liz Cheney that I think will someday be in bronze. She was a Republican, a member of Trump's party, one of the leaders in the Republican Congress, who decided that Donald Trump didn't have the moral code to be president. And she turned on him, knowing full well that it would probably destroy her political career. And it did. She said, no, he doesn't belong in the Oval Office. I think history may prove her right. But she was one of the few willing to say it out loud.
I received a letter once from my father, Jay, and he would always, there's like questions I ask him, and they would always end with a homework assignment and a story usually of him. And in one of those letters he shared with me, he's been in prison a couple of times, but one of the times he was in prison was because he, in the underground, went to the police to make sure that a certain crime wasn't being committed that otherwise would have went through on a Jewish family in a way. And at that point I had trouble understanding it because I was selfish, and I thought, well, you could have been with me. Why are you not now there? And he said something that was quite fascinating to me. He said, to always follow the dictates of your conscience, even if it leads to your death. But he meant it. It was not an empty moral phrase. Like for him, it was almost like that conscience is the highest authority we need to follow, and that his version of heaven was to live in complete congruence with the laws of his conscience, and to never ever compromise on that. And for him, it would have meant hell to, even if we would lived in a big castle, if he would have violated that holy covenant with himself. What is something spiritual you encountered or discovered for yourself in regards to how to develop this unbendable moral code? Because for me, those are the people I admire the most, and history is, they seem to be a few of them who actually existed, and they from different times. How do you develop that?
You get into the habit of saying, there's certain things I will not do. You got to make it a habit, especially in politics where you're tempted all the time. And it's true of people who hold office. It's true of people like me who work for candidates. I draw my rails and I say there are certain things that I will not do for any amount of money, period. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not going to be tempted by somebody who puts a big check on my desk and wants me to do something. But, right, once I bend, I know what's going to happen. The next morning when I shave, I'm going to be ashamed of what I see when I look in the mirror. I can't do that. I can't be ashamed of me when I'm shaving. So that's my motivation for sticking to the rail that I have established for myself. I don't want to be ashamed of me ever, because I lose my self-esteem. I will say there are people in public life who do quite often make too many compromises with their moral code. And they end up leading unhappy lives because they've done it. I know there are people in Congress that are alcoholics. They've made too many compromises with their moral code. So they're trying to bury it with the bottle because they're no longer proud of who they are. That happens in public life. They die unhappy people. They die with their reputation in tatters. It's not worth it. Some people think it is. I don't. Now, politics does require a certain amount of flexibility. You can't be rigid about everything. But here's a rail that I have that I'm happy to live with. I will not work for anybody that wants to weaken democratic rule. I can work for somebody who leans conservative. I can work for someone who leans liberal, because good. It takes two sides to hammer things out and come up with a compromise of legislation that works. I'm okay with that. But if you come to me and you say, I don't like democratic rule, I think we were better off going to a dictatorship, I have to say, then you'll have to win without my help because I'm not going to be part of it. That's my rule. Another rule, I will not work for candidates who bend the law or take illegal campaign donations. I have never violated the law for any candidate, and I've been asked to do that a few times. That's another line I will not cross. So I think in our eyes, in my eyes, we all have to have a moral code and we all decide how tight those rails are. And we always generally know when someone is asking us to bend the rails, it's insisting for your own self-esteem that you not do that.
There's a good book on this topic. It's called Ordinary Man. It's I forgot who wrote it, but it depicts the journey of a Polish police battalion during national like Nazi occupation, how they become from normal policemen to people who killed the women in the forest because they were and one of the lessons I learned from that book is that you become like that one tiny step at a time, like one tiny transgression over your conscience. And it's one of the questions I sometimes like to ask is this little micro decision, like who is this turning me into? So I try to infer what at the end of this waits, so to say, like who I will be at the end of the journey. And I think that sometimes helps you to resist in the beginning a little bit better.
Yeah, World War II has always been a source of endless fascination. If you look at the movies I've watched and the books I've read, it's in search of this answer. How did that happen? How did World War I start that became World War II in the millions of people slaughtered all over Europe? What happened to humanity that was possible? Of all the history I've ever studied, I just had never been able to get very far from trying to understand how that could have happened.
We also still in the process for this, Jay. Like for instance, what you mentioned earlier is like I'm very fascinated by leaders, regardless of their virtue. Like I'm more like I view things through a psychological lens and with curiosity and less with a with condemnation nature. I just try to understand things. And it's like, for instance, like Adolf Hitler, for instance, is such the fact that this actually happened, that there was a person who turned one of the most sophisticated cultures in the world into his personal death cult and became like this messianic leader almost, and who was adored almost as a demigod, that this actually happened in a state that was advanced is something I still don't truly understand, to be honest. Because we look at the North Koreas of the world, we say, of course, there, but the fact that they have been also productive and had the arts and had the literature, and that still they were tempted to follow this demagogue is something I think I'm still trying to understand. And I think we all still have to do some history lessons on to make sure that it won't happen again, so to say. And that's like one of the things that I find interesting. What do you feel when you think about this part of history in regards to politics? What is like something that you studied in this regard that interested you more than others? Because it was also, I feel, an epoch full with interesting people. Jesus Christ, from Churchill to Stalin to Hitler to the American presidents, all these kind of people in good and bad who appeared. Like, did you study this epoch also, and did you learn something for your own library, so to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, we know the statesmen of that era because there were people willing to say Hitler must be stopped. So it was leadership for Roosevelt to decide, and he was a good example of it. Roosevelt knew that the United States had to come to the aid of the UK, England. He knew that before most Americans did, and a lot of Americans were not interested in getting involved in the war. So he knew it would not pass Congress if once he knew it, that it just had to happen. He had to lead the country to understand why it was war important. He did it in increments. First thing was the Lend-Lease program, but basically we're supplying England with military equipment. You want to pretend they're going to lease it and pay for the military equipment we're sending them? No, they didn't. We gave it to them. All right. And then the final step was actually committing troops to Europe. First, it was the equipment. Now, once we'd been attacked by Pearl Harbor, it was an easy sell because that pissed everybody off. But up until that point, a majority of Americans had no interest in getting involved in the European theater. So, but it took Roosevelt's leadership, it took Churchill's constant prodding of Roosevelt to fix the problem that was coming out of Germany. So it produced the best of Churchill and Roosevelt, where they actually exhibited leadership that we remember to this day. In other words, they're stepping in and say, we cannot tolerate this. We're going to have to inconvenience ourselves to help stop it. There was a tremendous price paid to do that, and tremendous sacrifices on the part of Americans to be a part of it, because when everything was going to the war effort, there was very little rubber for tires. Food, gas was rationed. We sacrificed here too to finance the war machine.
A story about leadership. My father often told me, also in these letters, where the story of who tried to sacrifice his son again. Was it Abraham or Isaac? I'm confusing the names right now.
You got me on that one.
Yeah, I'm confused right now. But anyway, it's a story about that. If the divine asks you to sacrifice that which is most dear to you, you'll still do it. And it's one of the things I feel as a leader is one thing to endanger your own life and your reputation, but it's an entirely different thing if you do this for others, in some sense. So it's like the idea of sending your beloved citizens and young men to another country to certain death is something. It must be crazy to endure that from the psychological pressure. You have worked with people who were under tremendous pressure also. How do these individuals preserve their sanity while lifting immense load of external pressure that maybe a civilian in some senses does not have to carry, so to say? How do you become like unbreakable as a leader?
It's a funny thing that here's a story I'll tell you. It happened once. A woman had had an automobile accident, and the car was tipped over and laying on one of her children. She weighed less than 110 pounds. And in that moment, she found the strength to push that car off her child. Where did that strength come from? It's actually happened. Where did she muster the will to actually move an object that heavy off a child that was pinned underneath it? If you have the internal fortitude and moral character, you'll deal with the crisis and you will grow and you will find the strength to do what you have to do if you're properly made.
Do you believe this is one of humanity's greatest strength, is that often we are ignorant of our own limitations?
Yes, because every once in a while, I am sure you've had experiences when you're in your life where something challenged you and you just felt like you had to stand up to that moment and do the right thing or intervene or do something extraordinary or inconvenient because that moment called for it. We've all had little experiences like that. Leaders do too. Now, here's the thing about being president of, or the leader of any country. This is an uncertain world. There are many nations that have access to nuclear weapons. Any leader of almost any country is susceptible to having a nuclear weapon dropped upon their soil sent off by a rogue nation. How are you going to act if that happens? Sure, you'll try and prevent it, but what if you can't? What happens when somebody halfway around the world does something that's going to affect the health and welfare of your own country? How do you behave in that circumstance? And what you hope, if you're just a citizen of a country, is that that leader will find the strength to do the right thing and be able to handle the pressure. There's an example of something that happened when I was a kid. It was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. John Kennedy was president. Nikita Khrushchev was head of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev had smuggled nuclear weapons into Cuba, and they were under construction. We found out by accident. We found out about it by accidents because we put reconnaissance flights over Cuba at the time. It's only 90 miles from the United States. And one of the pilots came back one day with photographs that looked weird. And the intelligence people looked at the photographs and they figured out that these missiles are being constructed in Cuba, 90 miles from the United States, nuclear weapons. And Kennedy gave a speech to the nation and said, we cannot allow this to stand. It's 13 days where Kennedy's total concentration was on how do we get this stuff out of Cuba without starting a nuclear war? It was a perfect example of leadership because he was advised by his military people to go bomb Cuba. Kill everybody there, but get rid of the nuclear weapons. Kennedy said Russia is going to take that as a provocation and they will retaliate on behalf of Cuba. And now I got nuclear bombs headed toward Washington, D.C. And of course, we will retaliate and we'll be dropping bombs on Moscow. And now we've got a mess. So, how can we figure a way out of it? So, he ignored the advice of his military people and found another way to communicate with the back channel through the Soviet Union. And he then announced that we would establish a blockade to stop Russian ships from getting to Cuba that had these nuclear missiles and the component parts for it. Nobody knew how it was going to turn out. In the end, Khrushchev backed down. When he saw the blockade and he knew that John Kennedy meant that his ships were not going to land in Cuba anymore, Khrushchev ordered the captains of those ships to turn around and go back to the Soviet Union. Unbeknownst until later, through back channels, we had agreed to disarm a nuclear missile in Turkey that could have hit the Soviet Union. Here's what we were doing. We're giving Khrushchev a way to save face.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of being intelligent diplomacy. Back your enemy into a corner, give them something that allows them to save face, to avoid absolute total humiliation.
There's a story Vladimir Putin once shared, and he said in the story that when he was a child, that he was chasing a rat. He was toying with it, and he chased the rat into a corner. And when the rat had nowhere to go anymore, that the rat turned around and developed with such ferocious intensity and attacked Putin. And it was the most afraid he's ever been in his whole life, so to say. And one of the things I find interesting is the idea of, do we currently have a Kennedy in office? Like somebody who's wise enough to build a golden bridge for the enemies of the West?
No.
Or where are we currently standing with this? What is your idea on this?
The answer to that is no. We don't. Not in the United States. There are other countries that I think have great leaders. I have great admiration for the Prime Minister of Canada and the leader of Mexico. They have been very diplomatic about the way we have treated them. So I would have to put stock in some others to do the right thing here. I do not trust that intelligent decisions would be made. And here's the reason. Kennedy had surrounded himself with a diverse set of advisors. He always wanted to hear alternate opinions. So he had the military people telling him during the Cuban Missile Crisis, go bomb, go bomb, go bomb. He had others at the table that says, no, there has to be a better way. Kennedy essentially decided, I like the other options other than bombing Cuba. And he dispatched them to see what they could do, one of whom was his brother, Robert. Robert was the one who opened the back channel to the Soviet Union and found somebody they could talk to who was close enough to Khrushchev to communicate.
It's very famous that they had these red phones that they would talk secretly to each other, and were doing diplomacy. Is that correct?
Yeah. All right.
Interesting.
So, but when you have a tender situation like that, it's very, very important that you do not have a hothead making decisions.
And do you think the United States right now has a What is your take on Trump if you would analyze his political personality, so to say? How does he live up to people like Kennedy of the past?
It doesn't compare. No, I don't think he's not made that way. He got into office peddling grievance and spewing hate, and he's very talented at that. But uh, I don't think he has what's needed inside to make intelligent decisions, or if he does, it's because of somebody who made sense to him that he trusted. But his problem is he has surrounded himself by sycophants. And he's intolerant of getting advice from people who don't agree with him. His first reaction is when he hears advice he doesn't want to hear is he fires them. That's very dangerous in a president. You have to have dissent in front of you. You have to be willing to listen to opinions and change your mind and listen to experts that you may not agree with. But when you've surrounded yourself by yes people who tell you only what you want to hear, you're going to make faulty decisions. That's why I distrust his ability to respond, because he's surrounded himself by a group of people who like to shoot first and ask questions later.
Niccolo Machiavelli once said that to judge a ruler, you have to evaluate who that person has around them, so to say. If you would give some advice for, based on your experience of meeting leaders, what is your lens for making a decision if somebody is a virtuous leader or a tyrant in the making? Because it's not always, it's very dangerous, it's very difficult, I feel, to differentiate this as an individual between charismatic leader and potential tyrant, because they somewhat speak the same. What is a differentiator you've discovered that you could help somebody understand in regards to like some of value in self-defense, so to say, to give them some advice?
You generally see that in the course of a campaign because candidates are under constant pressure. You watch how they behave when on the bad days, and you get a sense of what they're made of. Okay, so here's the truth about a political campaign, and it's where I see it. Every candidate is going to have a bad day or
1 second, please. 1 second. Thank you so much, man. I just asked somebody if you could move upstairs. He was so glad to help me with this. If to come back to the question, if you have some advice for people to differentiate between a good leader and a potential tyrant, like what advice would you give them to having that lens, the wisdom to differentiate between the two of them?
I interact with them in tense moments. This is my own thing. I know my clients very well by the time the campaign is over. And I see how they behave, and quite often I'm like on a telephone or a Zoom call in moments of crisis where I see how they behave. How do they handle it? Do they fly off the handle? Do they lose their temper? Do they start screaming at people? That's someone that's deleterious to the process. That's someone who's not properly glued together. If you can handle bad news with calm and can say, let's not worry about who caused this, let's figure out how we fix this. That's a pretty good leader who's going to be able to handle pressure.
Mm.
If someone picks up an ashtray and throws it across the room and starts screaming at a staff member, they're not fit to hold public office because once they're there, they're going to act that way in difficult times. You never want to put a person like that in charge of a crisis.
Do you believe that it's a person like this who, a punitive leader, for instance, who behaves like this through cruelty in a microcosmos will also exert these same kind of behaviors on a bigger scheme potentially?
Yeah, they will. It's part of their pattern. There have been a few circumstances in my career when I've come to the conclusion that somebody I had decided to work for was not fit to be in office. I have. That's when you have to face a difficult decision. I have concluded that so and so has no business being a U.S. senator or a legislator or an executive. What do you do then? Those are the most difficult moral decisions I have had to make. They're putting food on my table, they're paying me for advice, and I don't think they belong in office. That's a tough one. 4 years ago, I quit a campaign. The person that I thought I was working for turned out to be a completely different person than he pretended to be. I just texted him one morning and said, our moral codes do not coincide. I'm leaving. We are done. That was my text message. I felt a moral responsibility. I just stepped away.
What was the transgression you observed without going into detail, without risking anybody? If you could elaborate on the story, because I feel like the what does this conversation we're having try to facilitate? And it's like both the Alexandrian Library and this podcast is to create more Alexandrian spirits. And for me, an Alexandrian spirit is somebody who does the right thing, even when there's a cost attached to it. It's very, if you know what I mean. I'm like always a fan of the people where they say the truth even if it puts them in trouble. They hide their neighbor even if they are in danger, or they do the right thing even if it comes with losing money or reputation or health or stress or something. So it's like if you could elaborate a little bit on the story, I think that would give
Okay,
a little bit more
well,
essence to it.
I'll tell you what triggered this. This particular candidate had called me at 6 o'clock in the morning and told me that his opponent had voted for a bill that did three really bad things. And he said, I need a press release because I'm putting this out this morning and I'm going to go after him. I'm putting my teeth in his back end over this. So as I started to write the press release, of course, I did my homework on what he had told me. And I learned that everything he had told me was a lie. That none of that stuff was true. Here's my conclusion. One, he's listening to somebody who is feeding him a bunch of propaganda, or he thought he could get away with this. But to me, that was the last straw, that he had so little regard for truth that he wanted to put out a press release in his name with three absolute and total falsehoods.
Yeah.
I drew the line at that point. No, I don't know who you're listening to. I don't know where you got this, but whatever your sources of information were, you're not very discerning about accepting somebody else's word without investigating it yourself or asking me to. Now, if he'd said, they said this, I want to know how much truth there is to it, that'd have been one thing. But he told me to write a press release and get it out. That was a that was an indication to me. Okay, this guy doesn't belong in the US Senate. He's willing to foment a lie. That's my boundary. That was one of them. I severed the relationship because of it.
It's
Uh,
we're speaking about the importance of words in the beginning. Um, it's one of the ancient words for devil is deceiver, or like another word for sin is the lie in itself. Like these old texts, they have an emphasis that the lie itself has a spirit, and that certain people are like harbor more of that than others. And it seems to be that there's more to telling the truth than just to giving factually correct in information, so to say. But it's a little bit more going on here. I'm digressing, so sorry. I was just thinking out loud. I skipped a question from earlier that I still would like to ask. If we would, I think you're a great teacher, Jay. I think you're one of the best teachers I've ever met. And
well, thank you.
in regards to the authority over the word, how would you teach to somebody to speak like a politician?
I would, well, sometimes I have to teach candidates how to speak. All right. So there is the formal. One of the things I do for any client who comes to me is I write the first draft of what we call their stump speech. I write it only after we have spent a lot of time together in conversations, me learning their story, and me quizzing them on what they want to accomplish. I synthesize those two conversations and I produce a draft of a speech anywhere from 1 to 3,000 words. And I say, I want you to look at this and let me know if this speech is an accurate reflection of your views, because I wrote it based upon the conversations we have. Usually the answer is yes, because I'm a very, very good listener. Okay. So is this a speech that they can give and be passionate about the words? Well, if they really believe what they're saying, they can be very passionate. Now, there's a different kind of training that you have to do with the candidate, and that is usually is the candidate ends up in a podcast or in a radio station interview or a newspaper interview or a TV interview or a town hall meeting where they're going to get very difficult, hard to answer questions. That is a different kind of training. So we rehearse those. And that's where you have to have a certain amount of alacrity with your answers because you're going to get questions you don't want to answer. Or you're going to get questions that put you on the spot when you're not quite ready to reveal your position on something. That's just political talent that's required to succeed in public life. So going into an interview with that, sometimes it's a matter of a candidate understanding how to answer a question in a way that it gets them votes and avoid answering questions that are going to cost them votes. That's where you have to work individually with candidates to prepare them for difficult interviews. including debates. So how do we do that? We practice it. We rehearse it ad nauseum. So I once was, we had a really important debate that was coming up for a client. Um, and we were dealing with a moderator who was known for asking very pointed questions. And I remember bringing in someone else to help me. We locked ourselves in a room for 2.5 days. And all we did was practice for that debate because there was a lot at stake in the outcome. And all we did during that debate was ask her the most difficult questions. And we'd pry, and she'd avoid answering it, and we'd come back with another question, just so that she could get used to what it was going to be like in that room. That's what you have to do. Debates are very, very high risk because one screw up and you can blow a whole campaign.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a particular case where I think Tucker Carlson was speaking to, was it Ted Cruz or somebody, and
Yeah.
it was about foreign policy, and the other person was making a case that it is important to send troops to Ukraine, and Tucker Carlson said something like, "Oh, so you don't care about what's going on here?" and said, "Right now, it is not of my concern what's going on in the United States. We have to do this." And just by this like linguistic misstep or something, it went so viral and killed this whole campaign. I was so fascinated from an observer's perspective how you it's really like a word battle you're engaging with a very venomous opponent at sometimes, right?
Yeah. Look, in every candidate, here's the truth about candidates. Every candidate's make mistakes too. Mistakes are going to happen in any campaign. You just got to be quick on your feet about how you handle them when they do. That's where you also need a candidate who can be calm in a moment of stress, especially one who's screwed up and know they've screwed up and they're mad at everybody because of the mistake they made.
One of my favorite political mistakes or like bounce backs was when there was this, I think it was Reagan. He was publicly attacked for being old, and he said he started the debate with, "I will not hold the youth and inexperience of my opponent against him," and everybody laughed. And it's like, and it's so funny that you can disarm even your opponent by handling your words correctly. One question I also have is, it seems to be also a game of money in regards to who wins the candidacy in a way. And if you would write like just some advice or how to raise funds for a cause or a political campaign, how would you teach the person who's listening to this how to go about this?
Um,
And I can recommend a great video you did that they should watch, but just for the people on the podcast.
okay, so let's start. There are, I'm going to use the term investment capital. A political campaign is kind of like a business when you're getting it off the ground. Say you're going to start a small business. Okay. First thing that people would say is um, you're going to need certain equipment. You're going to need certain kinds of staff. You're going to need a product. You have to have marketing. So, and you may need to spend money before you start making money. So, where is your investment capital? What's it going to cost to get this business off the ground? 100,000? A million? 3 million? What's the number? Because once it's off the ground, it may be a very profitable product that you are selling, and you may make millions of dollars, but there's a startup here, right? Look at a campaign the same way. Uh, the two kids that started Google, in its infancy, it was two kids in a garage playing with this concept called Google that would cough up answers to questions, citing news sources or what have you. They thought they had a great idea, but they also knew that it was going to require a lot more search and that they were going to need other kinds of talents to build it out, certain kinds of equipment. So, what did they do when they decided they really wanted to get this idea off the ground? They went to some people they knew, some people who were potential investors. And they sold those investors on their idea. That gave them the first bit of investment capital. And they worked a little more, and then they went back to their investors and said, well, thank you for the money, but now we're at this stage on our product, and this is what we got to do next. Would you like to put more money into it? Or could you put us in touch with other people you know that you think might be want to invest in Google? Now, in essence, what they were doing when they asked that question is they went back to somebody who was pretty well heeled. Well, people who have money tend to know other people who have money. So, in going back to them and saying, do you know others who might want to take advantage of the opportunity we gave you? In essence, they got that person to share names in their contact list and connect them to other people who had money. Doing this is similar to a political campaign. So I always tell candidates this. When you've decided you're going to run, go through your contact list on your phone, go through your Facebook friends if you have a Facebook account, go through your LinkedIn connections, and jot down the names of everybody you know that would recognize your face or your voice. And those are the first people you're going to call. Okay. Now, once you've got the list, reorder the list and put the wealthiest at the top. Now, divide that list into two parts. Column A are family, relatives, and close friends. Column B are people who know you and like you, but you wouldn't call them a close friend. You might just say they're an acquaintance. Now, go back to column A and start calling people who are family, relatives, and close friends.
You had a great point also about Jay, about getting over the internal hurdles of bothering other people with your cause. I think there's some internal things also going on. What advice do you have for somebody who like, what are some misconceptions somebody has who's has a strong emotional resistance to this? Because you gave me in our last conversation great advice for this, I feel.
Okay, well, the hang up that candidates have is, I can't call my friends and ask them for money. To which I say, you are not asking for money to buy food or a car or a new purse or what have you. You're asking your friends to invest in your cause. You're asking your friends to help you advance a cause that benefits a lot of people. You're just a means for people to get something that they want. That's what you are as a candidate. So get over this hang up about asking people for money. It's not for you, it's for your cause. That makes it easy, doesn't it? It's not. So at Christmas time in the United States, there are people who dress up as Santa Claus, and they're part of some organization called the Salvation Army. And they stand outside shopping malls and they ring a bell, and people put dollar bills or dimes or coins into a little kettle at Christmas time to help the needy. Some people walk right by and they don't put any money in the pot. He just keeps ringing the bell. Other people come over and they put $5 or $10 in the pot. He just keeps ringing the bell. You know why he doesn't take offense to people who don't drop any money in the pot? Okay, they're just not into my cause today, but I'll keep ringing the bell. Okay, so candidates end up calling some people who say, I'm not ready to give or I don't agree with your cause. Well, good, go on to the next name. But now, no candidate ever raises all they need from calling just people they know. But they can raise some investment capital to get it off the ground. Now, here's where the magic starts. If you can get your campaign off the ground, it means like a basic website, a Facebook page where you can start posting, an Instagram account, a YouTube account, places where you can say things, post things, and begin to attract followers. The website's social proof that you're really a candidate. It doesn't cost a fortune to do that. But if you start putting your message and information on a Facebook account about what you believe and what you want to fight for, once you begin to attract a following there, you can ask them to invest in your cause.
Ask and you shall receive is like one of my favorite lines
If
of the
you are
Bible.
not asking, you will not get. People do not wake up in the morning wondering if politician X needs a contribution today. You got to ask for it. So you ask. If you're not asking, you're not getting. Now, I know the culture is different in some countries. In the United States, people are very quick to take out their credit card and give money, $5, $10, $20 to candidates that they like. I do. Somebody says something I really like, and I thought that was cute. Let me send you $20 because I like what you have to say. We're very quick to do that. But other countries have different cultures. The greatest challenge I've faced are from candidates in Africa, Kenya and Liberia and other places where they've called and asked for help. And I explain this to them, and they say, Jay, you don't understand our culture here. Voters expect us to pay them. They're not, they're not digging in their pocket to give money to us. Jay, get over this. This doesn't work in Africa. Okay, I get that. But yet,
Yeah.
campaigns in Africa, established candidates seem to have ways of coming up with money, right? So, who are the kinds of people who give money in Africa? So, same principle starts. You start with your family and your friends and relatives and your acquaintances and people of means that you know, but you also need to be looking for those people who do get involved in political campaigns in your country and find a way to get into the door and meet them, or else cultivate your own friends who are willing to become new donors on your behalf.
Imagine, for instance, like I'm currently raising for a cause, and for me, one of the things I'm currently getting over my own shadow of is exactly the things you just described. If I could steal or borrow some words from you, Jay, on how to make that first ask, I have created trust with them. I have a noble project that is in the betterment of humanity, and they are a potential candidate to empower me to help more people in their collaboration with it. How would you ask? How would you ask the ask? Like, how would you articulate this particular question? Because it may sound like a stupid idea, but it's quite difficult for me to actually put the words together and asking somebody for a contribution. And I think when you speak, there's always so much grace in how you articulate yourself and also the pauses you have. And I think for me, this is like one of the things I would like to walk on, so to say. It's like have more also the appearance of a serious person who raises for a cause, less than a shaky artist who just follows his heart, so to say.
Okay, all right. So, who is it that you help?
We're helping authors and readers by creating a library of consciousness. We're storing consciousness of humanity's greatest teachers and making it freely available for everybody.
Authors and readers, which means that you are making wisdom in words accessible to people who will benefit from the wisdom in the words, right?
And we're empowering them that they can have conversations with, like this privilege that I have with you. Like what we're building allows you that you can talk to a book by because we've created an AI version of the author behind it. So if you're from an area that is poor in leadership, for instance, you can have a conversation on asking questions for your own self. So you have these these council of elders that you've described earlier. You have them in digital form at your disposal, so to say. But I am very certain of who this helps. But in regards to the philanthropist or the investor, this is something completely new for me because I don't understand quite how they are thinking.
I'm thinking off the top of my head. So I'm not sure about the validity of the answer, but what occurs to me is a story that you could tell about some poor child in some impoverished neighborhood in some impoverished country who, because he read a book that inspired him, changed the course of a country. All it took was that book and that passage to inspire a young kid to do something totally extraordinary. I'd have to look for a story like that. But it's where I'd start with that story and saying, I'm writing to ask you to help me make it possible for thousands, if not millions, of people trapped in places where there are no libraries, in places where they could go and see and read the great wisdom that has been scribed through many centuries of humankind. so that we can touch minds here and there and lots of places and bring those opportunities to people who will never otherwise have them. That might be one approach that I would think about doing.
Well, I'm definitely inspired. Thank you so much for allowing me to turn this into one note of personal advice for myself also. Um, I know you're always running on different things. I would like to be respectful of your time and move to the last section of the interview, which is called the Ezekiel questionnaire. And then I would like to fade out and ask at the end where people can find you and how we can help you. It's a
Okay.
much more rapid fire kind of questions where whatever comes to your heart you can say, and at the end I would ask you to contribute a little time capsule, and then we are done with the interview. Is that fine with you?
Yes, just I must be done by 3:20. Got a hard stop.
That's completely fine.
All right.
What are three books that have shaped you more than others?
I think well, I'm going to start with one book, Atlas Shrugged. Because I read a story about a world that I do not want to exist. And that's what Atlas Shrugged did for me. The world that existed in a book called Atlas Shrugged is not a world I want to exist. That's why it had a profound effect on me. Then there were two other books that I'll mention. One, he wrote four different books about Lyndon Johnson. I forget, they were very thick. I read them all, but there was one in particular, and I don't remember the title of it, but of Robert Caro, Caro, was the author, about Lyndon Johnson's time as Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate. The third one I'd say is Robert Kennedy and His Times.
What is your favorite word, Jay?
My favorite word?
Yes.
God, I've never had asked that question. Okay. Evidently,
Your least favorite word?
I can't. I
A
can't.
question,
It's
a
technically
question,
two words. All right. I can't. I
it,
don't.
a question. If you would put a question on every coffee mug in the world for leaders to see every morning, what question would you put on that coffee mug?
Were you proud of what you saw when you looked in the mirror this morning?
A quote you're trying to live by.
Mm, Teddy Roosevelt or Winston Churchill, I forget. I got to try and remember it. Far better it is to risk victory or defeat than to take rank with those poor spirits who know neither. For they live in a gray twilight that knows and never will know victory or defeat. I think I'm paraphrasing Winston Churchill, but that it's my way of saying I have lived a life of risk my entire life. And I've known the highest highs and the lowest lows. And that sure as hell beats the gray twilight of never being in the arena.
If you would think of your final resting place, maybe this is a tombstone, what kind of epitaph or one-liner would be above it? And then the last question would be afterwards, if this tombstone could be equipped with a video message of yours for people who find that resting place to pay homage to you, what would be this time capsule, this that you would encapsulate into it?
Well, be all you can be to the answer to that second question. And the answer to the first one, weep not, for he lived a very full life and died a happy man.
Where can we find you and how can we, oh, I'm sorry, did you wanted to add something?
I had a good friend, young mother diagnosed with cancer when she was 40. And when she asked the doctor, what's next? He says, I'm sorry, there is no next. This is terminal. You have a very limited amount of time to live, at best 6 months. And the last 2 months of that, you're probably going to end up in a hospital bed. There's nothing we can do. Sure enough, during the last 2 months of her life, she was confined to a hospital bed. And she had a sign on her door as her friends were coming to visit with her and say goodbye. She put the sign on the door. If you come in here and cry, I'm going to make you leave. And of course, that always started conversations when they walked in. And she says, I got a full 40 years. I brought 3 kids into this earth. They're going to live long lives. I married a man who's a loving husband and father. I got more out of this life than most people get out of their life, who may have lived 80 or 90 years. So do not feel sorry for me. Let's talk about the good times we had. She looked like just absolutely brave soldier facing a firing squad. In her case, cancer. So that's what I remembered when I answered that question. So what was your question now? Where can people find me?
I am out of question. It's been an honor and a privilege to go on this
Oh,
conversational adventure with you. And
you wanted my website though, right?
We would like to give the people who would like to learn more about you the opportunity to indulge in your great library of wisdom about how to be a great candidate and run and in all the political knowledge you have. Like, where do we find that for people who listen to this in audio? Where's your website? And also, our audience is some very powerful people listening. Like, how can we help Jay also? That's also an interesting thing. We see every podcast guest as a wisdom investor, So what is something we can do for you potentially?
Okay. People can find me at my website, jtownsend.com. It's just my name.com. If you can find my video library on YouTube. All you need to do is type in Jay Townsend into the search bar of YouTube, and I'm going to pop up. And
I've written I've written every single title of your YouTube video, and it's like it's the at some point this has to be like a great encyclopedia on how to become a politician. I'm very happy I found it for everybody who's maybe not just who wants to run for office, but I think learning about the skills that you're teaching is important for every founder, every executive, and every leader from every field, because you touch on so many different things. And although it is very customized for people who are running for office, I think it's a great ad to educate oneself into the library you have created. So thank you so much, and for making this freely available. It's also something that I find utterly fascinating. So thank you so much for contributing this to the public.
oh, you're quite welcome.
You're on the run right now. Thank you so much for today. For everybody who listened, thank you for investing your time into listen to these long format conversations. I hope that the consciousness of our guests is as infectious for you as it is for me, because I'm always changed after these kind of conversations. I feel I'm a little bit less stupid one conversation at a time. And as you know, there's lots of stupid that needs to die off. So thank you all for listening today. Jay, the man of the hour, thank you so much for making an appearance here.
Thank you very much for your time, your questions, and a stimulating conversation.
Likewise.